Welcome back, everyone. This is the 6th episode of the Progress Pondcast with me, Martin Longman, and my good friend Brendan Squire.
How's everybody doing today?
It's been a minute since we talked, and on deck today, we're going to talk about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Is he a creep, an idiot, or both?
Yeah, but before we get into that, I want to revisit the off-year elections, which had some pretty interesting results, especially right here in Pennsylvania. Although the media tried its best to spin Democratic wins as losses, Peter Baker at the New York Times, I am looking at you, buddy, because that was particularly egregious. But, you know, again, what else is new? But it was another blue wave, dare we say it. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, for example, the GOP's great fleece-vested white hope, he was humiliated when the Democrats held the state Senate and flipped the House.
Yeah, Glenn went all in on that 14-week abortion ban, and that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, and I think that's because after Dobbs, people can see how nutty these fruitcakes really are. I mean, down in Florida, Ron DeSantis signed a 15-week ban, right? And then right after, he went all in on 6 weeks. And of course, you saw abortion rights win in Ohio, which the state GOP has apparently vowed to ignore.
What do you expect from people who won't even make abortion exceptions for rape victims? I mean, they're literally on the side of rapists. And, you know, if they ever figure out that these rapist daddies will have to pay child support, maybe then they'll change their tune.
Yeah, they don't do foresight too well. But hey, we can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, absolutely. It sure does fit the pattern of rape enablers. You know, I don't care if you say no, I'm getting what I want. Right. So way to go, Ohio GOP, way to go. But I'll tell you what really does my heart good is remember a few weeks ago, we were talking about the anti-LGBTQ jihad at the Central Bucks School District right here in beautiful PA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were the ones pulling pride flags off the walls of the classrooms and suing that gay-friendly teacher and banning books. That's the whole Moms for Liberty shtick.
Yeah, that brain trust. That's the one. Yeah. Well, Democrats swept all 5 Central Bucks school board seats. Yeah. Republicans had a 6-3 majority, and now it's upside down. Democrats 6, 3 Republicans.
Right.
Turns out that parents really aren't interested in culture wars and made-for-TV drama and chair throwing when it comes to their kids' education. Yeah. And you know, honestly, I know people who live up in Bucks County, and most of them are just regular people, probably not all that liberal for that matter. And I would be willing to bet $1 that they were just simply embarrassed by all the attention.
Including from our highly rated podcast. You know? It's never a good look to be on the side of the howler monkeys pulling books off the shelves when your state's hemorrhaging teachers.
Which is a huge problem here in Pennsylvania. Huge problem. School I'm in, we've got 9, maybe 10 vacancies. But anyway, it was a good night for Democrats in the Philly metro area, generally speaking. They held on to all the burbs, all of which have been trending blue.
Yep.
But for me, the big news was right here in Philly itself. If you're not from the city, you need to know that there are 2 at-large seats on city council, which have typically been reserved for the minority party, which means the city GOP, which, by the way, the Philly GOP is a truly pathetic and withered organization. But the thing is, the Working Families Party, who you may remember from New York, they've established a foothold here. And this year, they took both of those at-large seats. Historic win. And now there's only 1 Republican left on city council.
Yeah, it's this weird thing they have in the city charter where each party's limited in how many at-large candidates they can run. So in practice, what that means is, I mean, historically, the GOP is always assured of having at least 2 seats or 2 at-large seats. But they're so toxic in Philly that like bona fide socialists took those seats away from them. So it really is gritty city. It's like anti-fascist to the core.
And speaking of toxic, since the last time we talked, the Republicans found themselves a new Speaker of the House. And man, this dude, Mike Johnson from Louisiana, he's a real piece of work.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I knew there was a representative from Louisiana named Mike Johnson, but I knew nothing about him. And I had no idea he was a big player in trying to pull off the January 6th coup, for example. And I guess he was like almost the brains behind that, in fact.
What weirds me out is that he somehow doesn't have a bank account.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and then he's got this application called Covenant Eyes on his computer. You hear about this?
I think so. Yes, I did.
Yeah. It tips off his son if he's a bad boy and watches porn.
And by he, you mean Mike Johnson, because that caught my eye too. And
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
as the co-parent of a kid who was a teenager once, his mom and I had to monitor their internet use a few times as well. I mean, not so much for porn, more like staying up till 3 all night playing video games, but I get it. I get it. But this thing with Johnson, I mean, whoo, let me read a little bit what he had to say about that. This is from 2022 at a conference at the Cypress Baptist Church in Benton, Louisiana. It was a conference called War on Technology. So Johnson says, and I'm quoting here, Covenant Eyes is the software we've been using a long time in our household. It scans all the activity on your phone and your devices, on your laptop, your tablet, whatever. We do all of it, and then it sends a report to your accountability partner. So my accountability partner right now is Jack, my son. He's 17. So he and I get a report of all the things that are on our devices once a week. If anything objectionable comes up, your accountability partner gets an immediate notice. And I'm proud to tell you that my son has got a clean slate. Unquote.
And I noticed that he didn't claim that he got a clean slate.
Yeah, what was he more concerned about? That his 17-year-old son might see some titties? Or was Mike using his son as a human shield to make sure he didn't succumb to the devil's temptation and have himself a good wank?
Probably a little of both.
And who could it have been? Let's see, I don't know. Let me think. Let me knock on Mr. Noggin. Who could trick us into doing that? Could have been Satan.
So what kind of person in his position doesn't have a bank account? What's up with that?
Yeah, I'm gonna quote here from Catherine Ramble of the Washington Post. She had an article about this, and it says, quote, in his most recent financial disclosures released last year, Johnson reports no assets at all, zero. There are no retirement accounts, no money market funds, no stocks, no crypto, not even a basic checking or savings account. Even more peculiar, his disclosures have never listed any checking or savings accounts on any of the forms he has filed going back to 2016, the year he was elected to Congress.
I don't even know how that happens. I mean, how does he even own a house?
I don't know.
Because you have to prove income and savings to buy one of those.
Right.
And hell, you need to show some kind of income to rent a spot in the trailer park for that matter. Although I doubt he's living like Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys.
Do you live around here?
I live right here in this van with my kitty.
I see.
Have you read the Bible?
Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. What's it to you?
But for real, how does a member of Congress get away with disclosing nothing about their finances for years? He was elected in 2016. And I mean, they obviously didn't vet this guy before they chose him as speaker.
It reminds me when they forced Newt Gingrich out after he impeached Clinton for a blowjob. Well, Gingrich was also having an affair. And then they wanted to choose Bob Livingston as a replacement for Gingrich, but they couldn't because he was stuck in a defense lobbyist. So then they settled on Denny Hastert, who turned out to be a boy rapist.
Yeah, just a boy rapist. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, vetting their leaders is not their strong suit. But in this case, they were just desperate to get anyone they could agree on. I mean, they spent 22 days trying to figure out who should replace McCarthy.
I wasn't sure they'd ever succeed without Democratic help. But now we have creepy porn guy with no bank account. And, you know, I guess maybe he's better than Jim Jordan, who also has rape issues.
These Republicans and their raping. But for real, I think this guy has serious skeletons in his closet that we still don't know about. And it doesn't look so far like he's really up to the job. I mean, we're only a few days out from a government shutdown, and he sent the House home for a long weekend. And I think he was supposed to jet off to Paris this past weekend to attend some international wingnet conference, but maybe the pressure got to him because his spokesman tweeted that same day that the speaker was not attending any events in Paris or anywhere overseas this weekend. So I guess he phoned it in.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it's not really showing an appropriate sense of urgency.
Well, you've been saying all along that the Republicans don't have a functional majority and can't pass their spending bills without Democratic help. And look what happened the past 2 weeks. First, Johnson failed to pass a transportation bill. Then he failed to pass a financial services and general government appropriation.
And remember, these are spending bills that renege on the deal that McCarthy made with the Biden administration back in May to resolve the debt ceiling crisis.
Right, because they cut spending below the line they agreed upon. And yet, even with that, Johnson can't pass his bills because his caucus is insane.
You're completely nuts. Toys in the attic, truly gone fishing.
Just for listeners, Marty, remind us of what McCarthy and Biden agreed to.
Okay, so back in May, McCarthy worked out a deal with the Biden administration to avoid a catastrophic default on the national debt.
That was the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023.
Yeah, and a lot went into it. The administration agreed to a variety of concessions related to like student debt relief, new harsh requirements for food stamps. There was more permissive oil drilling permitting. They also essentially signed off on freezing spending for 1 year and then increasing it only by 1% in the second year. So when Biden signed the bill, you know, he had like whatever it was, Rose Garden thing or whatever they did.
Yeah.
So he makes comments when he signs a bill. He says, no one got everything they wanted, but the American people got what they needed. In other words, they didn't default on the debt, right?
Yeah.
And then he praised McCarthy and he said, we were able to get along and get things done. We were straightforward with one another, completely honest with one another, respectful with one another, and both sides operated in good faith. And most importantly, Biden said, both sides kept their word. And the thing is, as soon as that bill passed, the House Republicans started demanding steeper cuts. And they accused McCarthy of getting rolled by the administration. So McCarthy immediately reneged on the deal. He broke his word. He said the agreed upon spending caps weren't an agreement at all. He told reporters, you always have to remember with appropriation levels, that's your cap. You can always do less. But the thing is, the administration made those concessions, right?
Right. And then McCarthy tried to pocket those concessions and not live up to his side of the deal.
And that's why he couldn't get any Democratic votes for the spending bills, and he had to go it alone with just Republican votes.
Yeah, but he couldn't do it.
He couldn't do it. He failed. And so then when the government was going to shut down, and the Republicans were quite rightly going to get blamed.
So then last second in September, McCarthy decides to just give up and pass a clean continuing resolution to buy more time. And this was a bill that just kept spending at the pre-existing levels for 45 days until November 17th.
Yeah, and those levels were set when Pelosi was the speaker, right? So the House Republicans were howling mad. But even then, 40% of them joined with the Democrats to pass it.
Yeah, and that's when Matt Gaetz made a motion to vacate the chair. And the Democrats, who were pissed at McCarthy for breaking his word and for a number of other reasons, like initiating impeachment proceedings against Biden, they decided to let him twist in the wind and die.
Okay, so that's where Johnson comes in. He comes in after 22 days of chaos, and then now he only has a few weeks to do something different from what McCarthy did. So he wants to pass all the appropriation bills with all these unrealistic cuts. And these bills aren't going to work. I mean, maybe they'll serve as a negotiating starting point or whatever. I mean, it really makes no sense.
Except, as we already said, he can't get them passed. He keeps having to pull them off the floor because he doesn't have the votes.
To get an idea of what's been going on, as they've been trying to pass these bills, they're having these votes on all these amendments, right?
Yeah.
And so we have votes like there's a vote on an amendment to prevent the government from using the word Latinx, right? Instead of Latino or Latina, it's Latinx. They want to make it so the government can't do that. Then they wanted to set the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre's salary at $1 for the whole year. Just pay the press secretary $1. They want to do the same thing to SEC chair Gary Gensler and put his salary at $1. Then they had an amendment to defund the Office of Gun Violence Prevention because that's not a problem, right? Gun violence. Then they wanted to abolish the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And then they had another amendment. It wouldn't kill it. It would just cut its budget in half. Then they had another amendment to ban online sales of the abortion pill, which a bunch of New York Republicans said, nah, like we're not going to go along with that.
Yep.
They had all these ideological and vengeful proposals that obviously aren't going to be part of any deal with Chuck Schumer's Senate, let alone the White House.
Yeah, it's a complete waste of time. Complete waste of time.
Yeah. So as I predicted, the Republicans don't have a functional majority. They can't fund the government or pay our debts on time without Democratic help. And electing a new speaker did not change that. And now Johnson is right back where McCarthy ended up, looking to pass a continuing resolution. And I might add that he'll need Democratic votes to do it.
Yeah, he'll still need Democratic votes, but he doesn't want to admit this, obviously. First of all, it's humiliating. But secondly, passing a continuing resolution with Democratic help is exactly what got McCarthy defenestrated. Woo, goodbye.
Yeah. So Johnson comes up with this idea people are calling a laddered CR, which is, it's probably not going to fly.
Yeah, that's probably not going to fly in the Senate. The appropriations chair, Patty Murray from Washington, already said that Mike Johnson's idea of a laddered CR is, and I'm quoting here, the craziest, stupidest thing I've ever heard of.
It's stupid and crazy and would set up at least 2 government shutdown deadlines rather than just one. And it's just a desperate attempt to make it look like Johnson isn't doing exactly what McCarthy did that got him fired.
So, well, then what happens now after Congress gets back from vacation? I mean,
I'm not sure, but I think the government's going to shut down.
why aren't you sure?
Well, for one, I think the process of electing a new speaker was so painful for the Republicans that they're not that eager to go through it again. So Johnson probably has the leeway to pass a clean CR with Democratic votes without immediately losing his job like McCarthy did, especially because he's like a genuine far-right loon. And for that reason, he has more credibility than McCarthy ever did. With with that cohort.
That would really cheese McCarthy off. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. If he just came into the exact same thing McCarthy did and got away with it, I mean, he'd be completely vindicated. McCarthy would be completely vindicated and it wouldn't do one thing to get his job back or his dignity back.
Dude, German poo porn extras have more dignity than Kevin McCarthy at this point. At least they're honest about what they do. But yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. So you're not betting on this outcome.
No, I can't really bet on the Republicans doing anything sane or confident at this point. But it's tricky. The thing is, the stupid, crazy laddered CR that Johnson is pushing is actually a clean CR. It keeps spending at Pelosi levels through most of January, and then the second half into early February. It funds the government at Pelosi levels.
So Democrats might actually go for it.
Yeah, they might. I mean, it would keep the government open over the holidays, and it doesn't involve any cuts or crazy amendments.
Which, well, that sounds like is why it won't pass with just Republican votes.
Yeah, I mean, we know it needs Democratic votes in the Senate, but it probably will need Democratic votes in the House too. The Dems so far aren't sounding too keen on the idea, but their criticism has grown more muted, I'd say. And so they might reconsider. They might go for it. But even if Johnson can get away with doing a McCarthy repeat and relying on Democratic votes, assuming he can get them, I think he might want more cover. So at least a short shutdown before he considers calling up a clean CR. He might put this ladder thing, he might pull this ladder thing and then pass some bullshit CR that has absurd conditions that the Senate and the White House won't accept. And then if they do that, they'll try to blame the Democrats for the shutdown.
That sounds awfully bleak. And then how do they get out of that?
If they won't or can't do a clean CR?
Yeah.
Well, they'll probably do a discharge petition in that case, which is when a majority of the House members sign a document asking for a vote on a bill. When that happens, the Speaker and the Rules Committee can't block it. So the Speaker loses control of the House floor.
Yeah, we were talking about this on an earlier episode. The Dems and a few Republicans will hopefully eventually join together to force a vote on a bill to reopen the government and just ignore the braying baboons in the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, it's the majority or the functional majority exerting itself. I've always said that the functional majority should join together to elect their own speaker so we don't have to deal with all this dysfunction and we can get right to the point, which is paying our bills and funding the government. A discharge might eventually be used for Ukraine funding too.
You said this would happen in January, even before McCarthy was selected.
Exactly, because I knew that we'd wind up here if they didn't pick a bipartisan speaker.
Well, welcome to power, pervy porn addict Mike Johnson. You won the booby prize.
Yeah. But he won't be putting that booby prize in his checking account because he doesn't have one.
That we know of.
Yeah.
So, hey, I want to turn to Israel. But before we talk about what's going on in Gaza, I want to mention something I read about the effort to pass aid to Israel while all this is going on.
What's that?
So I'm reading this piece in the Washington Post about Johnson facing all these challenges, and it had this paragraph that I just couldn't believe. So you know that the House passed an Israeli aid bill already, but to pay for it, they took all this money away from the IRS, right?
Yeah, which is not something we normally do with emergency foreign aid packages. We don't normally have offsets to pay for them.
Right. But Speaker Johnson says he wants to change all that. He wants to be a good steward of our country's finances, so he wants offsets for Israel and also for Ukraine.
Right. I mean, it sounds reasonable on the surface.
Okay, so let's look at this Washington Post paragraph. It's written by Mariana Sotomayor and Leanne Caldwell. Quote, Johnson earned praise for his earlier decision to pair aid for Israel with rescinding Democratic-approved funds to hire more IRS employees. Doing so is projected to add to the deficit, but Republicans celebrated it as a show of unity, since it paired the desire of many to help a foreign ally while assuaging fiscal conservatives' concerns.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Right? When you take this money away from the IRS, the result is that the IRS collects way less money in revenues. So that's why it's projected to add to the deficit.
Exactly. You rob Peter to pay Paul. It's self-defeating.
So they write this Israel aid package would add to the deficit. And then they also write Republicans celebrated as a show of unity since it assuaged fiscal conservatives' concerns.
Okay. Well, normally you think fiscal conservatives are concerned about deficit spending or adding to the national debt.
That's all they talk about. When they're running, that's all they talk about. It's the deficit, the deficit, the debt, the debt, the deficit, the deficit. But the implication here is that their concern isn't the deficit at all. And obviously, since they're celebrating adding to the debt and the deficit, they're celebrating the IRS collecting less in taxes.
Bingo.
So why can't the reporters make that explicit? They lay it all out by saying it will add to the deficit despite being a supposed offset. But then they say the Republicans love it because it's fiscally responsible. I mean, I don't get that.
It's just another sign of how we no longer live in a reality-based world. I mean, the reporting is accurate. The fiscal conservatives are celebrating the IRS offset, even though it's fiscally irresponsible.
The reporting may be accurate, I guess, but Sotomayor and Caldwell should hit that point harder.
I agree. I agree. But on the Israeli aid, I'm thinking maybe it shouldn't pass anyway. I'm thinking we shouldn't just hand over this package unless Israel changes its approach in Gaza and starts being a lot more deferential to what the Biden administration wants to see.
Yeah, I saw you wrote a piece about that at Progress Pond this weekend. Progress Pond, our blog, everybody, called This is Much Bigger Than a Ceasefire.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the way Israel is just destroying Gaza, which is really epitomized by the fact that aerial surveillance suggests that almost 50% of the housing in Gaza has either been damaged or destroyed in the 5 weeks since the Hamas October 7 attacks.
You also pointed out that 40,000 Gazans have either been wounded, killed, or are missing, probably under all the rubble.
Yeah, and there's no food, there's no water, the hospitals are closing one by one, and there's, no medical supplies.
And this is by design.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, my article has these quotes from Israeli politicians and military officers that emphasizes the importance of having a completely disproportionate response.
As a deterrent. What's it called? The Dahaya Doctrine?
Yeah,
Dahaya Doctrine?
I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but yeah, it's I got that from this Washington Post article by Ishan Tharoor. I don't know how to pronounce his name either, but Dahia is a suburb of Beirut, which is a stronghold of Hezbollah. And in 2006, there was the war between Israel and Lebanon. It started with a border skirmish. There was the Hezbollah kidnapped a couple of Israeli soldiers that came across the border to do that. But the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, bombed the shit out of this Beirut suburb. And, Beirut's nowhere near the border, first of all. So, but the thing is, it had nothing to do with stopping rockets or preventing cross-border kidnapping raids. I mean, they bombed this Beirut suburb just to do a lot of damage and to send a message.
You have this quote by former Israeli Colonel Gabriel Siboni, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who wrote a paper outlining the strategic thinking behind this. I'm quoting here again. The necessary response to militant provocations from Lebanon, Syria, or Gaza were disproportionate strikes that aim only secondarily to hit the enemy's capacity to launch rockets or other attacks. Rather, the goal should be to inflict lasting damage, no matter the civilian consequences, as a future deterrent. With an outbreak of hostilities, the IDF will need to act immediately, decisively, and with force that is disproportionate to the enemy's actions and the threat it poses, he wrote. Such a response aims at inflicting damage and meting out punishment to an extent that it will demand long and expensive reconstruction processes.
Yeah, and when you consider that they've destroyed almost half the housing in Gaza already, they've gone way beyond a long and expensive reconstruction process.
And then you have this quote from October 10th from this retired Major General Giora Eland, who wrote in the newspaper that, quote, the state of Israel has no choice but to turn Gaza into a place that is temporarily or permanently impossible to live in. Creating a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a necessary means to achieving the goal. And he later wrote that quote, Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. That guy is retired, okay? But I think it's reflective of the thinking of the military, at least if you look at what they've actually done. And I have no problem with going after Hamas after the atrocities they committed. But to do that, you don't have to turn Gaza into a place that no human being can exist.
Yeah, especially using our tax dollars.
Especially using our tax dollars.
The problem I have is that Benjamin Netanyahu is still in charge. And it is his policies and his arrogance and incompetence and immorality that brought this ruin on both Israel and the Palestinians. For starters, it was his policy to let Hamas run Gaza and even allow them to be well funded. And this is a matter of record. He's said this a number of times. He would prefer to have Hamas running Gaza because it meant he didn't have to deal with a two-state solution.
Right. And with Hamas in control of Gaza and the PLO or Fatah in charge of the West Bank, he could argue he had no one to negotiate with.
Right. There were two governments, not one, and they didn't get along. Plus, Hamas is a terrorist organization. So this gives them another excuse not to pursue a two-state solution. It was all very, very convenient.
And then meanwhile, he allowed the settlers to overrun the West Bank.
Oh, did you see that settler that was interviewed by Isaac Chotiner of the New Yorker? Holy moly.
Yeah.
She was pretty blunt about it. This is what she said. The world, especially the United States, thinks there is an option for a Palestinian state, and if we continue to build communities, then we block the option for a Palestinian state. We want to close the option for a Palestinian state, and the world wants to leave the option open. It is a very simple thing to understand. Well, Netanyahu certainly understood it.
Yeah, I mean, well, yes and no, right? I mean, he obviously didn't understand that Hamas could and would strike back. And he was too busy trying to rig the judiciary in Israel to keep his own ass out of prison for corruption to keep an eye on what Hamas was plotting.
Yeah, that's the other thing. He divided his country for the noble cause of keeping his corrupt butt out of prison. He figured he had all that under control. Every few years, he'd mow the grass by having a little war with Hamas and otherwise keep Gaza locked down with a total blockade, and he could go about the business of making sure he killed any hope for a two-state solution.
Except now there's a big problem, which is that irrespective of the blunders and mistakes Bibi's made, Israel's Iron Dome and blockade and big fancy wall failed to protect Israel. And now the people have lost all sense of security.
Yeah, that is a big problem. Because if Hamas remains in place, in a few years, the whole thing is going to be repeated. So even if he doesn't need to kill every Palestinian in Gaza down to the lizards, as Borat would say, he needs to restore a sense and a reality of security.
And that's an enormous challenge. And it seems obvious that he's not the man to do it.
He's definitely not the man to do it. And you can tell by how he's going about it that it's more of the same. You know what else that settler told Chotiner?
What?
She said the Gazans should be dispersed to Egypt and Turkey and that Israelis replace them.
I know Bibi said Israel isn't going to do that. But the thing is, he's not leaving anything left of Gaza, so it really doesn't seem so different.
Well, that's why I think we have a problem, and why I'm not sure we should just hand over a big military package to Israel, like you were saying, especially with Netanyahu still in charge, and for that matter, back-talking the Biden administration. That's our money, dude. That's our money.
Yeah, and we're held responsible for it, right?
We absolutely are.
Yeah, people are pissed, right? So I agree. I mean, I'm totally sympathetic to the Israelis. What Hamas did was inexcusable. They need to return the hostages. In my mind, they should just turn themselves over to the Israelis to save their own people. They're a bunch of violent religious fanatics with no regard for the life of anyone. But we should not be the party to what Israel is doing, at least not the way they're doing it.
Yeah, not at all. I've been reading that Arabic communities all over the United States are rising up and saying that in no way will they vote for Biden in 2024. And as you pointed out earlier today when we were talking, that's a good way to lose Michigan, and we can't lose Michigan.
Oh yeah, there's a whole political component to this too. Like Biden needs to be mindful of. We've been talking about the moral aspect of it.
Yep.
And but there's a national security aspect to it, which we just mentioned, which is, this is infuriating the world. I mean, especially the Muslim world, but pretty much, the whole world.
A Jewish friend of mine living in New York City texted me right after hostilities broke out saying that Bibi Netanyahu just put a target on all of our backs, which, yeah, you did. Thanks, Bibi.
Yeah, I mean, all you see on the news all day long are atrocities, right? So somebody's going to get angry, somebody's going to lash out. And, we've been attacked before for our Middle East policy. So we know firsthand you can't just do anything you want and think nothing's going to happen.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I support Israel, but I also, I feel like their leadership needs to be mindful that there's a cost for us and a risk for us. And if we're telling them, hey, we don't want you to blow up hospitals, maybe you should listen, right? And if you don't want to listen, maybe we should be, a little less than prompt about giving over the aid you need.
It's been said often that the United States is the best friend that Israel could ever have, right?
Yeah.
And we funded a lot of their security. We back them to the hilt. But it really strikes me that Israel is not being a very good friend to the United States right now. Certainly not Bibi Netanyahu.
No, I feel like the Israeli people know that. I mean, they know that he has failed, that Netanyahu's failed them.
Yep.
And everyone's saying like, oh, once the war's over, he's going to be gone. He'll be thrown in the dustbin, And maybe that's true, but I don't understand why they just don't do it now.
Yeah, nor do I.
To me, it's like there's a whole bunch of lessons that need to be learned about the mistakes that he made, and they're not just mistakes about not paying attention to the border.
Yeah.
They're mistakes about how he could treat the two-state solution, how he could treat the Palestinians, how that was all going to work out. And it's not working out the way he planned. And they need to rethink this. And I don't think they can go forward without acknowledging that the two-state solution or some kind of political autonomy for the Palestinians has to happen. And he and his political movement have no interest in that. We quoted the settler who has no interest in that, and she's kind of reflective of the people around Netanyahu who they're just like, hey, just kick them all out of Gaza and throw them into Turkey and Egypt. and problem solved. And,
Yeah, but I don't
we
think that solves any
support that.
problems.
Our government doesn't support that.
Yeah.
And if they're not going to listen, or if they're just going to pretend they're listening and just keep doing the same old thing, we can't be a party to that.
No,
So
we can't.
And Biden's political coalition won't survive it. You know,
No, it absolutely. What were you telling me about protests and carnations a few minutes ago?
I don't know. There's this article about staffers up on Capitol Hill that are kind of revolting against our support, our unqualified support for Israel right now, you know, that are calling for a ceasefire. And I guess they sent anonymously, they sent like 10,000 carnations to their own bosses to, you know, represent all the people who've died. And so that's just showing you like it's bubbling under the surface in Congress. But then there's also, as you were mentioning, like practical political issues like Michigan, like if the Arab Americans in Michigan don't vote, or if they don't, if for whatever crazy reason they vote for Trump, then Michigan's probably not winnable. And that's a pretty critical state for
that's a
Biden.
very critical state.
So yeah, even if you're not persuaded by the moral issues, there are practical political reasons why this is going to come to a head. But you know, it's complicated because there's no easy solutions. They do have to restore their security. It's not easy. You have these Hamas figures with this elaborate tunnel system. They are hiding under mosques. They are hiding under hospitals. And so it's not easy to go in there and root them out. But at the end of the day, you have to have a plan for what comes on the day after tomorrow. And that's what I don't see.
Yep. With while you were discussing that, I just did a quick internet search, and 2 days ago, NPR reported that most Israelis want Netanyahu to go.
Oh yeah.
November 3rd, 76% of Israelis wanted him to go. On November 7th, I'm quoting from NPR, on November 7th, a leading pro-Netanyahu newspaper reversed its stance and ran an editorial calling for his ouster after the war. And polls taken last month show that Netanyahu would lose if elections were held now. But I guess that's a question that the Israelis are kind of facing as well. You know, they've had Netanyahu running the show pretty much for however many years, quite a long time.
He's managed to get kicked a couple times.
They kicked him out a couple times, but he always came back, always comes back like herpes. And
yeah,
I'd have to imagine that a lot of Israelis are having that conversation with themselves. If not Netanyahu, who? And you know, I mean, George Bush. I mean, during the George W. Bush's disaster in Iraq, there was some noise about kicking him out here in the U.S. And what was his line about? You don't change horses midstream or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I'll bet there's a bunch of Israelis that are kind of in that boat, being like, Netanyahu sucks. We got to do something about it. But geez, we're in the middle of a war right now. You know,
yeah, I mean, you had the opposition join in like a unity government. I mean, I understand that. Like, it's a time of war. You come together, you put your political differences aside, and you get the job done, right?
Yep.
But this is an unusual situation, and this is a situation where everything that Netanyahu did has failed and been discredited. And then on top of it, and I'm not going to pretend that the Israelis aren't mad and that they're not pushing for the destruction of Hamas, but the way he's going about this is just consistent with a lot of these policies that brought us to this place.
Yep.
And that's another issue. It's an issue for Israelis, but it's also an issue for Biden, because it would be a lot easier for us and for other allies of Israel, strong allies like Germany, say, to work with a fresh government that doesn't have this stain, you know, and
yes.
So it's a real problem, and I just think he needs to go. I don't know what the mechanism for that is, but if I were the Biden administration, I would be telling everyone with ears in Israel this aid package isn't coming until Netanyahu's gone.
Yeah.
That's just me, and
That's you and me both.
And it wouldn't be coming either until we got some assurances about how they were going to conduct themselves in this Gaza thing too.
Yep.
Because getting rid of Netanyahu isn't the be all end all.
Yeah, of course not. Of course not. But right now it's just
whoever replaces.
Right now it's just
Go.
wholesale slaughter in Gaza. And it's yes, it's your disproportionate, response, but
it goes way beyond deterrent.
It's gone way beyond deterrence here. Yeah. It's gone way beyond deterrence. Yeah. And I am no friend of Hamas in any way, shape, or form, but to me and to I think a lot of people, it looks like what Netanyahu's government is trying to do is I'll use the word, it's genocide. What they're trying to do, they're not letting in any water. They're bombing hospitals. They're killing children.
No electricity.
No electricity. They're literally trying to wipe out every single person in Gaza and make it like it looks like they're trying to make it a North Korea style, DMZ, no man's land.
First of all, they pushed what a million people or more south of, the halfway mark, Gaza, right? And then they destroyed most of the housing north of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hamas turns over the hostages tomorrow and surrenders, whatever that means. They go, okay, well, now a million people can come home to your destroyed homes.
Yeah, I know. Right? What are they coming home to?
What are they coming home to? They don't, their businesses are flattened. Their homes are flattened. Their infrastructure is flattened. And who's going to rebuild that? Who's going to pay to rebuild that?
Right.
So there's not a lot of thinking going on here beyond just creating a deterrent and smashing everything. And
what kind?
Go ahead.
And what kind of deterrent is that anyway? When you have just made the folks next door, the people next door, everybody around you, even more inflamed with rage than they already are. It's like with Russia and Ukraine. Even if Russia leaves Ukraine tomorrow, they're going to have to deal with an angry neighbor. They're going to do. I think the word is a porcupine. They got a porcupine next door, and Israel already had a porcupine next door, and they just made it even fucking worse. Pardon my French, everybody. I mean,
I saw somebody. I'm not sure who it was, but somebody in a position of authority in Israel. Was talking about Hezbollah, and they said if Hezbollah wants to start some shit, what we've been doing in Gaza, we can do to Beirut.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and so that's a deterrent. I mean, the people in Lebanon look at Gaza and they go, "Well, we don't want that."
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who might be able to restrain Hezbollah might be inclined to try, right? So I get that aspect of it. But there still is just no proportion to this. There's no thoughtfulness to it.
None.
And we've got to get our heads around this and get some control over the situation if we're going to be partners in this. So yeah, I'm not in the bash Israel crowd. I've not been a supporter of their right-wing policies, but I'm very supportive of the idea of the Jews finding a place they could be in charge of where they didn't have to rely on someone else, because that had not worked out for thousands of years.
Yep.
And I get that.
I get that too.
But there's a responsibility too, there's other people that paid the price for that, and they're still paying the price, and it's very heavy. So while I'm supportive, I really think we need to think hard about whether or not we're going to just hand over money to Netanyahu to continue this the way he's doing it.
Yeah, I can't see how that can continue. Well, that's all for today, folks. Sorry not to end on an upbeat note. Next time we'll try for happier news and commentary. like Joe Biden's big student loan forgiveness program that nobody seems to be talking about. Not in the mainstream media, not in specialty media, not on the blogs. I'm Brendan Squire. This is Martin Longman. We're here for the Progress Pondcast. Please like and subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the platform of your choice. Our music is provided, as always, by the magnificent Royal Hounds from Nashville, Tennessee. Their new album, Plateful of Nothing, is available on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your music. But we'll see you next time from the Progress Podcast to you. Have a good one, folks.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and see you next time.
Bye-bye for now.
My name is Borat. I come from Kazakhstan. Can I say first, we support your war of terror. May we show our support to our boys in Iraq. May USA kill every single terrorist. May George Bush drink the blood of every single man, woman, and child of Iraq. May you destroy their country so that for the next 1,000 years, not even a single lizard will survive in their desert. To show our friendship, I now will sing our Kazakh national anthem to the tune